Dragon Ball Lao Su is the god of destruction. Chapter 261-280. Chapter 261. Daughter of Kesher, Princess Ruini. Chapter 261. Daughter of Kesher, Princess Ruini. After being shocked for a second, Kesher slowly put down his hand, clenched tightly by his side, gritted his teeth and insisted on this last bit of stubbornness. The god of destruction turned his head and walked in front of him. Sure, where do you think you can lead this planet with your current strength? This sentence surprised Weston. He looked at the god of destruction and didn't understand his intention. He knew very well that god of destruction was a person who didn't want to bother to talk. At this time, he said such heart-piercing words. Kesher's fists creaked with force, and he bowed his head deeply, trembling all over his body. Is this why you want to destroy it? After a long while, Kesher asked without emotion. The god of destruction didn't answer him, but turned around, glanced at Wes, and raised his legs to leave. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, the footsteps of the god of destruction seemed to be amplified in his ears, and he could hear them very clearly. He clenched his fists tightly, his nails sank deep into his flesh, and warm blood flowed out from the center of his palms, ticking to the ground. Kesher only felt that his legs were as heavy as lead. He took a step forward, raised his head, and looked at the figure of the god of destruction vaguely, as if it was about to leave his sight. He slowly raised his hand and opened his mouth slightly, trying to save the god of destruction again, but it seemed that he couldn't make any sound, and his eyes suddenly became pitch black. He seemed to see the faces of the people on the planet, the smiles of every child, every look of trust, but suddenly he became fearful, sad, and sad. When I opened my eyes, I changed the scene again. A huge fluctuation flashed in front of my eyes, as if a huge force was coming. Everyone on the planet was crying, screaming, and weeping at him. But he was powerless. Ah! Suddenly Kesher grabbed his head and knelt on the ground, screaming in a low voice. It sounded heartbreaking, and even Vados behind Champa was moved. The god of destruction stopped and turned his head with his hands behind his back, a smug smile on his face. Suddenly, a burst of light burst out from Kesher's body. The light became bigger and stronger, and the power became stronger and stronger. He waved his hands down, raised his head, and shouted at the sky. The surrounding land began to tremble, and the surrounding force caused huge cracks in the surrounding land. The robes of the 4 god of destruction were placed behind them by this huge energy fluctuation, and a huge wind came in an instant, but the 4 of them persevered and remained motionless. Seeing the light dissipated, Kesher walked over slowly, his hair turned white, reaching his waist, and his whole body stood up straight. Wes looked at the god of destruction with a shocked expression. This is absolutely different from the previous one. Maybe the god of destruction did it on purpose, and his eyes widened when he thought of this. Kesher only felt that his body was full of energy now, and he was inexhaustible. When he saw the god of destruction, he rushed over regardless. The god of destruction glanced at Champa and Vados behind him, and then stepped forward to meet them. The 2 of them fought directly on the ground for more than 100 rounds, and everyone was dazzled. Vesco gritted his teeth and looked at Destruction God's excited eyes, as if all the power in his body was stimulated, but Destroyer God only felt a lot of water, and unknowingly added 10% of his strength, and a loud shout was a punch. Go past, in the middle of the facade. With a bang, Kesher was knocked back a few steps, followed by another punch, and he half knelt on the ground. The god of destruction was in full swing, and another punch followed. Father! With a loud shout, the god of destruction felt something approaching, so he stood up slightly, and the whip rubbed the tip of his nose and landed on the ground beside his feet, causing the god of destruction to withdraw his action. The god of destruction squinted and glanced at the approaching person, only to see the owner of the whip rushing directly over and supporting Kesher next to him. Father, are you all right? Only then did the god of destruction see clearly that it was actually a woman with neat black hair, pointed ears, and a long tail behind her. Cowell coughed twice, put down his hand, and shook his head. Father, you, she looked at her father in shock, her face lost the usual folds, and she looked much younger. Her white hair grew to her waist, which looked completely different from the little old man with a beard in her memory. The same. She gritted her teeth secretly, stood up directly, and glared at the god of destruction. What the hell did you do to my father? The god of destruction frowned. This woman actually had a leopard-like face, big eyes, and a cat-like nose, but her whole body was as white as a human being, and he could even see the lovely beard on her face. Retire back, Cowl snarled, panting heavily. Father. Ruini pursed her lips and looked stubbornly at the god of destruction, motionless, clearly unwilling to back down. Chapter 262 Not Convinced. Chapter 262 Unconvinced. The god of destruction glanced lightly, and at this time Xingmu glared at his woman, the red long whip tightly held in her hand, looking domineering. The red whip seemed to show her personality, hot, enthusiastic and flamboyant, which made people unable to take their eyes off, but the eyes full of sparks were a little uncomfortable. The god of destruction seemed a little displeased, his purple eyes frowned slightly, his lips pursed into a line, but he didn't speak. Seeing this, Kesher covered his chest with one hand, and wrapped Ruini behind him protectively with the other, but his eyes didn't stop at Ruini. Master God of Destruction, it's a little girl who is ignorant. She usually spoils me. Don't take it to heart. I'll ask her to make amends for you. Kesher secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva, bowed his head and said politely, he was afraid of angering the God of Destruction. I was afraid that so many people in Kesher would not be enough to warm up the God of Destruction. Ruini was disturbed by her father and was very unconvinced. She didn't understand why her father stopped her. This man killed so many people on the planet Keshul. The word suddenly widened his eyes. Seeing that Ruini didn't make a sound for a long time, Kesher's old face couldn't hold back a little. Although Ruini was usually arrogant and domineering, he was also a sensible child. What happened now? Pulling Rennie to his side with a serious face. It's just that Ruini's eyes were dull, and she seemed to have lost her mind. Those big eyes dared to look straight at the God of Destruction. Ruini, what are you thinking? Why don't you quickly apologize to the God of Destruction? Kesher followed with a big hand and shoved Ruini. Ruini seemed to have recovered. Father, what did you say? By the God of Destruction. Is he the God of Destruction? He pointed at the God of Destruction with a shocked expression, swallowed his saliva, and looked incredulous. Looking at his daughter's appearance, Kesher felt over. He dared to treat the God of Destruction like this, but the Lord of God of Destruction did not like others to point at him. He would think it was a kind of provocation. Kesher felt that his temples were jumping wildly, and he couldn't stop at all. He raised his head and glanced carefully at the God of Destruction. Sure enough, the aura around the God of Destruction had been reduced by several points, and he was angry. The God of Destruction squinted and frowned slightly, obviously with an unhappy look on his face. Ruini, don't be rude to the God of Destruction. Don't hurry up and apologize, or I won't be able to keep you. Kesher's tone revealed a bit of sternness, and there was a bit of indifference in his eyes, looking at Ruini. But even though Kesher said so, he was just such a precious girl, and his body subconsciously stood in front of Ruini again. The big deal, it would be fine to trade his own life for his daughter. God of Destruction, don't be angry, don't be angry, don't care about the little girl. Turning around, Kesher put on a dog-legged look again. His eyes were squinted with a smile, and the speed of his face changing was unbearable. What? The God of Destruction took a step forward, his purple eyes narrowed slightly, and the glittering light in his eyes stared at her round eyes. The God of Destruction opened his thin lips lightly. Although it was only 2 short words, it revealed his dissatisfaction at this time. He didn't pay attention to the old guy Keshul, but said it to Ruini, which was an indirect affirmation of Ruini. Question. Kesher was extremely nervous at this time. He was the only daughter, and he was naturally spoiled. He had a good temperament and was usually a child obsessed with cultivation. Boldly, he still protected Ruini tightly. Lord Destruction God was also staring at Ruini at this time. Seeing that the situation was wrong, Kesher continued to mediate the situation and looked at Destruction God apologetically. The God of Destruction finally turned his gaze to Kesher, but Kesher felt that the gaze was particularly sharp, as if it had turned into a sharp blade and slashed countless times on his body. She was trembling under the enormous pressure, but her legs were a little soft. The hand that was holding Ruini was tight, but now she was sweating, and she let go of her hand slightly, as if to relieve her. Take a moment to be nervous. But at this moment, Ruini suddenly stood in front of him, and Kesher couldn't stop him at this moment, so he could only give Ruini his eyes desperately, but Ruini seemed to have not seen it. She is not reconciled. The legendary God of Destruction is extremely powerful, and anyone has to give him some points. It has always been her dream to see the God of Destruction, but now that she has really seen it, she looks at the God of Destruction in front of her. The God of Destruction stood there quietly, but she felt that the God of Destruction did not seem to be a threat. He didn't speak for a long time, but his brows were a little wrinkled. The more he looked, the more Ruini felt that the God of Destruction was not as powerful as the legend, especially because his father still blindly stopped her from letting her be presumptuous. She was even more dissatisfied in her heart. She could apologize, but she had to be convinced, so she wanted to fight the God of Destruction for 300 rounds to prove the rumored fact that the God of Destruction's martial arts was unfathomable. Chapter 263 Provocative. Chapter 263 Provocation. The two were deadlocked for a long time, sparks had burst in the air, and a tense atmosphere rushed into everyone's heart, and then a crisp voice interrupted the silence in the air. God of Destruction, I want to duel with you. Ruini's tone is not small, because she is very unconvinced. She has been concentrating on cultivation since she was a child, and she believes that her strength has been perfected. She doesn't take them seriously at all. She only believes in strength. She firmly believes that the God of Destruction in front of her is sought after by everyone. Not so bullying. Ruini was already a little complacent, and her brows were stretched out. The people around were already stunned. I didn't expect that someone would dare to provoke the God of Destruction like this, and it was still on the site of the seventh universe. Obviously, they did not take the God of Destruction seriously. Especially when Kosher heard his daughter's provocation, he almost lost his footing, staggered, and took a few steps back. For the first time, he regretted that because he was only a daughter, he usually spoiled her and did not discipline her strictly. I love it. Lord God of Destruction, forgive me, Lord God of Destruction, forgive me, Tong Yan Wuji, She's finished making trouble with you. Kesher, who had come to his senses, kept admitting his mistakes to the God of Destruction. That head is getting lower and lower, as if as long as the God of Destruction doesn't speak, his head will be lowered into the cracks in the ground. Ruini is still young, he can't be so early. However, when he heard Ruini's words, the God of Destruction didn't blame him. The corners of his mouth became more and more curved, and he laughed lightly, obviously because he was interested. Duel with me, little girl, she's quite temperamental. God of Destruction also finds it amusing. After all, no one dares to duel with him for so many years. Very interesting. It's just this laughter, hearing Ruini's ears a little harsh, the seemingly non-existent smile at the corner of her mouth made her feel that she was laughing at her own self-control. Lord Destruction, try my whip. Ruini said through gritted teeth, feeling that her self-esteem was hurt. It's interesting, I really want to try it. The smile in the eyes of the God of Destruction was deeper, and the words he said were equivalent to agreeing to the showdown in a different way. Kesher, you have raised a good daughter. The God of Destruction gave Kesher a casual glance and said nonchalantly. As the saying goes, the speaker is unintentional, but the listener is intentional. Kesher was named at this time, and he didn't even dare to breathe. It's over. Lord God of Destruction must think that Ruini is too rude. At this time, he is making fun of me for not being able to discipline your daughter well. The rest of the people had already made room for the duel between God of Destruction and Ruini, but Kesher couldn't relax. The god of destruction has already agreed to this duel. He dare not have any objections. He looks at Ruini with deep meaning, hoping that she can turn back. The worries in his eyes are almost overflowing. It's just that Ruini was already immersed in her own world and didn't see it. Kesher sighed deeply, and for a moment seemed to be 10 years old, slowly moved to the side of the god of destruction, and said in a hoarse voice. Sir, god of destruction, please be merciful. As long as you click, the planet Keshuel will be obedient from now on. Thank you for your kindness of not killing. Kesher must leave a way out. He has ruled the planet of Kesher for so long. He is also an old fritter. Although he does not know the reason, he knows that the Lord of Destruction cares about the planet of Kesher. In order to save his daughter's life, he can only do this. I don't know if Keshuel was wrong. The god of destruction has never spoken, and he couldn't tell whether the expression on his face was happy or angry, so he didn't dare to speak, for fear of making the god of destruction unhappy. Ni can't stand it for sure. So Kesher bowed slightly and stepped back. Just when it's time to step back. Yeah, a single syllable came out of the god of destruction, too fast and too short. Kesher raised his head suddenly and looked at the god of destruction in shock, fearing that it was his own delusion. Not sure, his body stopped. There, I don't know whether to step forward or step back. The god of destruction didn't react at all, and the anxious Kesher was sweating on his forehead, but he didn't dare to ask, until Whis, who was behind the god of destruction, nodded lightly at him, as if verifying that the god of destruction the adults did agree. Kosher's eyes filled with a smile again. Thank you, god of destruction, and thank you, Lord Weiss. He quickly left the god of destruction and made room for him. The look in Ruini's eyes became lighter. His father's eyes seemed to give Ruini more encouragement. Ruini thought that his father encouraged him to cheer him up and defeat the god of destruction. He grabbed the red whip forcefully, and his eyes became firmer and more confident. Lord Destroyer, the whip doesn't have long eyes, I'm offended. Ruini finished saying this and looked at the god of destruction. He just stood there calmly, obviously not doing anything, but everyone behind him seems to have become a background board, foiling him. And LT, title and GT, through Dragon Ball, I am Beerus_text chapter 261-280.txt and LT, title and GT. Chapter 264 Duel. Chapter 264 Showdown. It's just that such a calm god of destruction, in Ruini's eyes, he feels even more anger in his heart. Ruini nodded comfortingly to his father, meaning to reassure him, and then stared at the god of destruction with fierce eyes. As soon as the war was about to break out, Ruini quickly waved the red whip in his hand, and went in the direction of the god of destruction. The whip seemed to be alive, full of life, and nimbly drew an arc in the air, and then flew like lightning. Past this whip, Ruini used all her strength. She vented all her dissatisfaction on the whip, just to show the god of destruction some color. As long as the god of destruction touches this whip, he will definitely not be able to stand up again. Seeing the whip being beaten mercilessly, the people around took a deep breath, because they had seen Ruini's whip, and they seemed to think of the way they were beaten before. I couldn't help worrying about the god of destruction, because the god of destruction stood there and didn't move. The whip must have used a lot of strength inside, and it was quickly thrown over with the wind. Kesher just felt that the cold sweat on his forehead could no longer be controlled. What happened to his daughter? When did his desire to win become so heavy, and he dared to use such a cruel hand against the god of destruction? How much was poured into that whip? The power of it must be visible to anyone with a discerning eye. The god of destruction's eyes were dark and unclear, and no one knew what he was thinking. Looking at the whip, he was thoughtful, but his expression gradually became disdainful, and finally a hint of sarcasm appeared on the corner of his mouth. PFF'd. There was still a hint of mockery in the air. The wind galloped, and the god of destruction moved. With his own voice, no one saw how the god of destruction escaped that dangerous whip. The speed was so fast that everyone didn't blink, but they didn't know the god of destruction's move. Seeing the god of destruction easily dodging his own whip, Ruini's eyes were astonished, as if she didn't expect that. She was stunned there. Hey, pediatrics. The god of destruction was telling the truth, but the tone in his voice was full of provocation. Just warming up just now, let's see the trick. Ruini, who had reacted, glanced at the god of destruction with an inexplicable look, and the anger in his eyes became more intense. He whipped again, once, twice, and 3 times. Every time the god of destruction seemed to be able to predict it, he avoided it easily. The god of destruction saw that Ruini was just like this, so he didn't want to tease her anymore. Before, he had been dodging and didn't make a move, just when the red whip came at him again. The hand was full of energy, emitting a ray of light, and hit Ruini's whip directly and mercilessly. The whip hit received a force, and Ryla became numb from the hand by this force, and then gradually spread to the body. Inside. The backlash was backed up again and again, and he couldn't help but cover his chest with his hands, and a gust of sweetness came up from his throat. Ruini's face suddenly turned pale, and he swallowed the blood slowly. The people around were looking at Ruini nervously at this time, noticing Ruini's strangeness, and only then did they know that the god of destruction's martial arts has reached this level, and Ruini was injured with just a light palm, but things were not simple. Finish. The red whip was also overwhelmed by the blow, and it slowly spontaneously ignited in the air, and then Mars scurried upward along the bottom of the whip. Ruini made a quick decision and let go of the whip, just like throwing away a hot potato. At this time, his favorite whip was simply solved. Looking at the crackling whip on the ground, slowly shattering, Ruini's eyes flashed a hint of distress. Ruini was dazed by the anger, panting heavily, her chest heaving constantly. She was unable to speak at this time. It was just her unwillingness to admit defeat that made her attack the god of destruction with her bare hands. Although she was used to using a whip, but without a whip, she considered herself very powerful. However, her anger and despair affected her moves. The god of destruction didn't want to be entangled anymore. Anyway, the final result was the same. A palm went out and hit Ruini's chest. Ruini actually flew out. Kesher couldn't bear it any longer. He flew to catch his injured daughter in midair, and slowly landed. Sir, god of destruction, please forgive Ruini. Kesher will be very grateful. I can be a cow or a horse for you. Kesher kept begging, not wanting his daughter's life to be ruined here. A trace of blood spilled from the corner of Ruini's mouth, but she didn't wipe it. She was so vulnerable, and her father had to clean up the mess for her. When did my father be so humble to others? Today he bowed his head for himself countless times and looked into his father's eyes. It's all guilt. Kesher begged for mercy, and the god of destruction gave this favor along the way. After all, he still had his own plans. Let's go down to heal with Ruini. The god of destruction nodded kindly. Chapter 265 The Truth. Chapter 265 The Truth. The god of destruction originally just wanted to teach this lawless Ruini a lesson. He didn't use much force in the palm of his hand just now, otherwise it must be a corpse lying there now. It's just that Ruini was thinking about fighting the god of destruction for 300 rounds before, but it was only 3 rounds, and she was let go. At this time, Ruini realized that the gap between the two people was so big, and this fact surprised her. But she's not the kind of broad-minded person. She won't find reasons for herself. She is stronger than herself, especially, she likes powerful people. Ruini held back her discomfort and smiled charmingly, but her face was a little pale, and there were red bloodstains, which made people feel a little distressed. Thank you, Lord God of Destruction, for your kindness. I have offended you a lot before. I'm sorry. Ruini is not sensible. Please don't care about me. Your strength is stronger than the rumors. Ruini is not stingy with her praise. At this time, she is sincere. In the past, she felt that she was one of the best on the planet Casual. She was defeated this time, and she was really convinced. Well, don't care. The cold god of destruction went online again. Ruini looked at the god of destruction, but began to change unconsciously. In the sense of respect, There was also a hint of shyness, yes, just shyness. Ruini has always pursued strength, and when the god of destruction defeated her, she already fell in love with this powerful man, and such a person deserves to be liked by her. Immediately, he kept smirking at the god of destruction, and the god of destruction was stunned for a moment. He was a little puzzled. This girl, wouldn't he be making himself stupid? He obviously didn't exert any strength. Due to the force of the laugh, the wound was involved, and the pain could no longer be held, and Ruini fainted. Seeing that the god of destruction was not to blame, Kesher secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but when he saw his daughter fainted, he panicked immediately, and put his arms around Ruini's arm a little harder. "Thank you, Lord God of Destruction. I'll take the little girl down to heal her wounds. Please go to the main hall and sit for a while." There was a rush of words between the words. The god of destruction nodded, and Kesher, who was granted the answer, backed away from the crowd watching the excitement, arranged the servants, took the god of destruction and his party to the main hall to drink tea, and politely resigned. Then he held Ruini for a teleport, and then disappeared. The god of destruction looked at the figure like the wind, and he already had a mind in his heart. When Kesher arranged for his daughter and transferred his energy to his daughter, he saw her long eyelashes trembling a few times, and he opened his eyes leisurely before putting down the big stone in his heart. "Tell father, is there any discomfort?" Kesher asked with concern. Ruini said weakly, "It's okay, father, don't worry, I made trouble for you, I'm sorry father." Ruini, "It's alright, it's fine, just wake up, don't be so reckless next time, my father will go to entertain the god of destruction first, you can rest here." Kesher left his daughter's room. Although Ruini kept asking to see the god of destruction just now, he refused because her body was not healed and she couldn't move easily, but her daughter was too stubborn and insisted on following her, saying she wanted to make amends. In the end, Kesher reassured her that the god of destruction would not leave today. He is Ruini's father. At that time, he saw Ruini's changing expression, and his daughter knew for herself, when did she put down her air and apologize to outsiders like that? He is even more worried about Ruini's love for the god of destruction. He knows that Ruini likes powerful people. Although the god of destruction is very powerful, many people will like such a person. He is afraid that his daughter will be injured. Along the way, Kesher had a lot of thoughts, but he just walked into the main hall, packed up all his emotions, and looked at the superior god of destruction drinking tea. Kesher walked over and greeted them one by one. "How's Ruini?" The god of destruction just asked casually. He just exchanged greetings and had no other intentions. It's just that Kesher was startled at this time and secretly suppressed his emotions. Because the god of destruction was playing with his fingers, he didn't raise his head, so he didn't notice anything strange in Kesher's eyes. "The little girl has woken up, and it's not a big problem. You said that you were merciful. I want to thank you. I'll let her recover and then come to the door to thank you." Kesher answered slowly. He just wanted to test it out to see if the god of destruction had any interest in Ruini. "No, let her take good care of her." God of destruction decisively refused. He hated troublesome things the most, and he tapped the table with his hands, looking very boring. Seeing that the god of destruction didn't care, Kesher complained in his heart for his daughter. Immediately changed the topic. "Sir, god of destruction, you said before that after 3 days, the earth will be destroyed. Is there any other way? People here have lived here for generations. Let them move out. They can't adapt." Kesher's words were a little worried, but also a little pleading. Chapter 266, Tell the Truth. Chapter 266, Tell the Truth. "I don't want to hide anything from you, so please shut up and listen to me slowly. It's your honor that I can talk about it calmly." Looking at Kesher, who was so impatient in front of him, god of destruction decided to show down with him in desperation, otherwise the consequences of his temper would definitely be unimaginable. The guy in front of him has average strength, but his character is extremely impulsive. If Kesher accidentally provokes the god of destruction, it is impossible to say that the planet will be destroyed tomorrow, and it will be the kind at any cost. Now the creatures are most afraid of this kind of guy. There is a feeling of being uneasy for Jade, not fertile. And the god of destruction knew that the current situation was so complicated that it would not allow the slightest mistake to be drawn, otherwise, who would be able to bear the consequences? If the god of destruction is angry, and the planet suffers, then it will really be worth the loss. But to tell the truth, it's really difficult for Weiss to talk to this guy, but he's not a vegetarian. If you settle the guy in front of you, violence can solve everything. Lord God of Destruction, you can just say it. I just hope that you can raise your hand. No one wants to do anything that will cost you everything. I can't be that stupid. After hearing the god of destruction, Kesher patted his chest without hesitation, as if he was such a smart person, but he looked so funny. The god of destruction resisted the urge to laugh out loud. The world is so big, there are not many people who can make him laugh, and there are not many people who can make him have 1,000 wickedness in his heart. The fearsome person in front of him is a real cow. There are countless aspects of breaking characters. I don't know how long it's been since I sighed like this, but when I meet such a funny guy, it can be regarded as adding a little color to life. After all, life is all about survival all day, and the meaning of his existence also makes many people afraid, so occasionally there is a little accident, but it is not so unreasonable. This is how it happened. So, the god of destruction began to talk to Kesher, and explained the cause and effect of the incident clearly. What he was most afraid of was that something happened to Kesher. Misunderstanding the meaning of his words, thus causing unnecessary trouble, is very embarrassing. Every step he takes now is very important. For the sake of his father, he can't make the slightest mistake, otherwise he will lose everything, so Kesher is also very important. As the so-called missing, 1,000 miles away, he really did his best for all this. In the process of discussing with you, I found that his bloodline is very special, which surprised me very much, but it also surprised me very much. When the god of destruction said this, his face also overflowed. This is a very unexpected gain, but it is very beneficial for him to complete the big thing, and he is naturally very happy. Really, what's so special about it? I really want to know, what's so great about me? I'm bothering you to talk to me so hard. I thought it was the sun coming out from the west, and the southwest wind was blowing you coming. Kesher asked calmly, but what he said could choke people to death, and the god of destruction was also making a promise in his heart, if it wasn't for his father. He couldn't allow Kesher to be so presumptuous. He really wanted to be mad at him, so he simply asked Wesses to tell him directly. What do you think? Weiss didn't know how to deal with Kesher, so he asked rhetorically, to deal with such a guy, he must use a lot of methods, otherwise he would be unable to deal with him first. Kesher answered very calmly, as if I was not afraid of anyone. If I knew, would I still ask? After living for so many years, I haven't realized that I still have such skills. Although I don't know what's special about it, but I feel that I'm so good, I somehow feel like I'm very powerful. It's not a waste of me to come to this world. ... The god of destruction was very speechless, and suddenly remembered that there is a saying that is very popular in the human world recently, "Shower, is that you?" I especially wanted to send this sentence to the unknown guy in front of me, but in order not to provoke myself from losing my temper, I didn't say anything, and the god of destruction didn't want to talk nonsense with this guy anymore. Otherwise, the Western District will be delayed again. In order to prevent such a thing from happening, the god of destruction will cut off Kesher's words with a sharp knife. It even went light years away, and it would be really difficult to get it back then. The god of destruction told Kesher that if it could be thoroughly stimulated, he would definitely be able to take a step stronger, so he angered him and let him die and live again. We'll arrange for them to go to other planets. Chapter 267. Caught off guard. Chapter 267. Caught off guard. After Kesher listened to it, he calmed down a little, but he was no longer as nervous as he was just now. At the same time, the god of destruction also told Wiz to go to Jawang later to create an identical planet. However, after the god of destruction explained everything to Cowell, Cowell realized that he was deeply wrong, and he couldn't help feeling guilty. He was not an unreasonable person, but he was always impatient. But if the god of destruction knew these words, he would definitely want to complain very much. This is called temper. Is it a little irritable? This is obviously because people are living too loosely, and they don't care about any consequences at all, or they think that they are the best in the world, and I am not afraid of anyone. ... These two have different thoughts. If they know each other's thoughts, it will inevitably be another battle. If they don't know, the next relationship between the two will definitely not be so stiff. Cowell felt guilt in his heart, while God of Destruction felt helpless, and he felt a sense of relief. He has never felt so difficult to talk to a person, and it took him an hour to explain everything clearly. Although this incident was really extremely important, and I had endured everything for this incident, but when I thought about my past efforts again, a crow had to fly through my heart, and I felt distressed for 10 seconds. The guy in front of him is really difficult to communicate. What is the brain hole? It takes people a long time to explain, and it takes so much effort to explain things that can be clearly explained in just 2 sentences. But at least it has been explained clearly now, and he has finally overcome this difficulty in his heart. Now he is happy in his heart, and he has already foreseen the next direction of development of the matter. This guy, although it is very difficult to tell him the truth, but he is a person who talks about benevolence and righteousness. As long as things conform to certain routines and do not violate the so-called ethics, there will be no bad results. Sure enough, after the two of them were relatively silent for a while, Keevil changed his mouth to speak, and the tone was exactly as the god of destruction expected. So that's the case. I am really sorry. I apologize for the unreasonableness just now. Keevil apologized sincerely and bowed at the same time. In fact, only he himself knows that he has lived for so many years, but he has never been so useless. He has always been the eldest brother in front of others, but today he is also wrong. Moreover, this person in front of them is also a big guy. If you try to act force after encountering the brain, there is really only a dead end. This is not something that people like him can do. Although it is normal, he thinks a little bit, but that's because he's a bullshit, and he can't get it right. Of course, he has to use his brain and change his way of thinking, because things always have to be done. Learn to be flexible is the right way. Forget it, it's not your fault. It's human nature that you can react like that before you understand me, and I won't care about you like this, as long as you understand, what I mean is fine. The god of destruction said a little arrogantly, although the words are closer, but the tone must not be slack, it must make the guy in front of him feel guilty, and he is not begging him to do things by himself, but notify him. This point, he wants Keevil to understand, then there is no time for him to ask God of Destruction to do things. Well, thank you for ignoring the villain. It turned out to be just another planet to live in. It scared me. It really is old. Not only the old eyes are dizzy, the ears are not working, and now I am afraid that there are some mental problems. The problem, as expected, is that people are getting old and useless. Quote. Keevil began to sigh, although the words are very modest, but there is also the weight of his identity. He also wants to let the god of destruction understand that he is not an errand, and everyone is at most an equal relationship, but just had some negotiation on some things. Well, it's good to explain things clearly. The most worrying thing is that we will quarrel in the end. That's the least optimistic thing. What do you think, G? The god of destruction, like a smiling tiger, is very cunning. He smiled a little, and Keevil was a little surprised, but he still held back. That's right. Now I'm very satisfied with the result. I hope that these unexpected things will never happen again. ... The two looked at each other and smiled. The god of destruction and Wes were about to leave, but Keshul's daughter Rennie was obsessed with the powerful energy of the god of destruction. Father, I want to go with the god of destruction. I hope you can understand my feelings. Cowell's daughter looked at his old father very sincerely, and her eyes were full of expectation. He was throbbing, but Kivil's face almost turned green. Chapter 268. Ruini burst into tears. Chapter 268. Ruini burst into tears. Quote. For a while, I couldn't think of anything to say. It turned out that the so-called caught off guard means this. The god of destruction said coldly, "Your current strength is not worthy of being with me." He was also speechless in his heart. When he went out or did anything, he could meet Peach Blossom. Ruini burst into tears on the spot, and Kivil could only say that he was too willful to this daughter, and then touched his old face, trying to hide his embarrassment. The god of destruction followed west to Shampa, but Shampa had a hippie smile on his face. "Ouch, can't you see that you are quite attractive to girls?" As he spoke, he slapped the god of destruction on the shoulder with a playful look on his face. The god of destruction glanced at Shampa with disgust. He were twin brothers. If it wasn't for his imagination, he really doubted that Shampa was definitely picked up by his parents in the trash can. But Weiss noticed that there was something wrong with his sister's emotions. Speaking of which, he and Vados were sisters and brothers. Although they were not twins, their relationship had been good over the years, and they were both angels. There was an inexplicable mutual relationship. Contact between. But it was only for a moment, as if Vados's expression changed again. The expression was still indifferent, and it looked no different. "If you're full, exercise more and see how fat you are." The god of destruction patted Shampa's belly, gave him a disdainful look, and frowned slightly. "What are you talking about? You're like a skinny monkey. I don't want to be skinny like you." Saying that, Shampa clenched his fists and became annoyed, staring at the god of destruction. Seeing that the two were about to quarrel like this, Weiss stood up directly. Let's go. As he spoke, he put his hand directly on the shoulder of the god of destruction, knocked the scepter under his foot, and flew out directly, and a beam of light appeared, reaching the sky. "Weiss, your sister." There was only one sentence left unfinished. "Ha ha ha." Shampa rolled on the ground while holding his stomach and laughing. Vados looked at the childish Shampa and couldn't help but help his forehead. "Lord Destroyer, don't be angry." Weiss felt the killing eyes behind him, and quickly turned his head to look at Destroyer, just like a coquettish for a while, and blinked at Destroyer. "Go away." Seeing Weiss like this, he only felt chills all over his body. When will the nature of this dead girl be corrected? He simply crossed his legs and put one hand on Weiss's shoulder, which was very boring. Weiss secretly raised the corners of his lips in front of him, and couldn't help sighing in his heart that the god of destruction is a knife-mouthed tofu-hearted man, and it's not that he can't bear to be angry with him all the time. He didn't know how many times the god of destruction wanted to replace him had passed through his mind. Weiss tapped the scepter lightly, and saw a cloth-wrapped bento appear in his hand. "Sir, god of destruction, your dinner." I wanted to stubbornly turn my head away, but my stomach rumbled uncomfortably, so I could only pick up the bento in embarrassment. When I opened it, the dishes were quite rich. After gobbling down a few times, he directly took down all the bento on the third floor, and Weiss couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth when he saw it. After a while, Weiss saw the old Kaiwang god, Kaiwang Xing, and directly accelerated the speed and landed on the ground. The old realm king felt the aura of the god of destruction early in the morning, and stood outside waiting to welcome the god of destruction, while Shin and Tassa were actually there on the old Jawang planet. As soon as the god of destruction landed on the ground, he saw Shin and Tassa behind the old world king god. Staring straight at Tasha for a while, he laughed out loud. "Not bad, entered the demigod realm." He nodded with some relief. At this time, Tassa's hair had grown back to its previous appearance, and he seemed to be much more energetic. After being praised by the god of destruction, he even scratched his head embarrassedly. As soon as the two of Shampa fell to the ground, they heard the words of the god of destruction. "Demigod realm." Vados glanced at him expressionlessly behind him. It means that he already has the power of a god, and he has a chance to become a god with one more chance. As he spoke, he stared at Tassa and nodded. He didn't expect to have such strength at such a young age. When Champa heard this, he directly hugged his shoulders, with a sullen expression on his face, and muttered, "Why are the realm gods of the sixth universe just those two old guys?" The old god of the realm stroked his beard and took 2 steps forward. "I have seen Mr. Champa. Speaking of which, the sixth universe and the seventh universe were originally 2 universes that were next to each other and corresponded." As Pa said, the old guy is basically the same age as the old realm god. He has already become a god, and he looks amazing. "Lord God of Destruction, we still have business to do." Weiss posted it, looking at the god of destruction with a flooded expression. "You stay away from me." The god of destruction suddenly dodged and ducked, goosebumps all over his body. Chapter 269. Give you overtime pay. Chapter 269. Give you overtime pay. Weiss looked lonely, looking at the god of destruction aggrievedly, and there was a mist in his eyes. That's right. Whis and the god of destruction were about to leave when Whis suddenly stopped and said. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and the god of destruction also stopped and looked at Wes in confusion. Whis ignored the suspicious eyes of the god of destruction and said to the old king of God, "Before we leave, the god of destruction has something to explain. Do you think you can agree?" The old god of the realm was stunned for a moment, then quickly reacted again and said with a dog-legged expression, "Of course, as long as the god of destruction speaks, we will be satisfied." Weiss looked at the dog-legged appearance of the old realm king, sneered in a low voice, and said, "Okay, then our request is." Suddenly, Weiss's voice was cut off, but soon, Weiss's mouth opened and closed again, and continued the unfinished words. "In one day, a planet that is almost the same as the planet of Keshul will be built, and, the probability of not being able to differ from planet Keshul is more than 3%. The old world king was stagnant, and the embarrassed look on his face betrayed his thoughts. "What? You can't do it. Didn't you say that as long as the god of destruction speaks, you will be satisfied?" Weiss said, his tone full of teasing. The old god of the realm froze in place. "I have said this, but, how can I do such a difficult thing? Damn it, bragging bee is blowing up." The old realm king scolded himself in his heart for making decisions too bluntly. But after all, this has already been said. If he refuses, he will lose face. That's natural. You can rest assured that in a day, we will be able to complete the task. You can wait for our good news. The old god of the realm was really protecting his face. He swallowed his saliva. Layla was not there. How could it be only himself? But he still had to bite the bullet and agree. Of course, Whis also knew that the old world king was protecting face, so he asked for it. As for whether it could be achieved, Whis already knew it. "Haha, I really didn't see you wrong. When the matter is finished, we will definitely thank you," Whis said with a smile. When the old realm king saw Whis saying this, he quickly replied with a smile, "That's not necessary, it's my duty to do things for you." The person next to him seemed a little disgusted, and suddenly he didn't know who said, "Old realm king god, you clearly know that we can't do it, so why are you lying to him?" The old god of the realm glared at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "Who said that? Come out to me." That person had the guts to say that he didn't have the guts to come out. The crowd was so silent, you could hear a needle drop. "I tell you, my old realm king said that it can be done, then it can be done, did you hear it?" The old king god glanced at Weiss and found that the smile on Weiss' face did not fade a little bit because of what he just said. For some reason, he was relieved. All right, what kind of skill is it to talk about it? We will come back after a day, and we will have to take a look at that time. Lord Destruction God will give you overtime pay," Weiss said with a smile, and the old realm god hurriedly answered, "Okay. If you have to hurry, go early, I won't deliver it myself, I have to discuss with them what to do." Quote. While watching the movements of the two, the god of destruction, who had never spoken, looked at the two with cold eyes and remained silent. "Okay, god of destruction, Vados, Champa, let's go." Weiss nodded, the smile on his face still unchanged, and said, "Come on, Tilda." The first person to react was Shangpa. Shangpa replied with a smile, and then rushed towards Wes. Weiss looked at Shangpa, felt a chill in his heart, and ran away. The god of destruction slightly raised the corners of his lips and left. "Hey, why do you have to make things difficult for him? He didn't mess with you." Weiss managed to dodge the elephant, and the god of destruction silently stepped forward and asked. Hearing the god of destruction's question, Weiss gave the god of destruction a puzzled look, and his eyes were full of, "Don't you know why I did this?" Weiss looked at the confused look of the god of destruction, sighed and said, "You don't care so much now, I will tell you sooner or later, but, not now, do you know?" The god of destruction listened to what Weiss said, smashing his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just replied dully, "Pretend to be a ghost." Nita Planet. Planet Nita. The data shows that the people living on planet Nita are slightly weaker than the people of planet Keshul. They are all a group of irritable and dull aboriginal people. It is difficult to communicate. Whoever pissed them off basically had no good consequences. Quote. Weiss looked at the information in his hand and said word by word. "Then, Weiss, go talk to them and try to communicate without talking too much nonsense." The god of destruction said, looking like Pa and Vados in astonishment. Weiss was stunned for a while, and then he was silent for a while before slowly answering, "Yeah." Chapter 270. Annoying Weiss. Chapter 270. Annoying Weiss. Now that the new planet has been built, I would like to trouble you, Weiss, to take a hard trip and ask the natives to move their nests. The god of destruction was sleepy. "I want to sleep well now, I guess you must not, Weiss. Will disappoint me, won't it?" Weiss owed his body, as he had done thousands of times before. "Follow your instructions, god of destruction." Question mark 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 question mark. That group of indigenous people. Weiss thought, weak and helpless, it should be very good to persuade. After all, they are facing, but the Lord of Destruction, the King of Destruction, who everyone knows. There are several loyal soldiers under Weiss, so when Weiss informed them of the purpose of this operation, it was no surprise that they won their affirmation. Therefore, Weiss nodded with great satisfaction, and went to Nita's star first. When these people raised their heads from the ground, the disappearance of Weiss made them very stunned. Quote. This is gone. The one who spoke was a cat-head monster, but as far as I know, that old monster from Nita's star is very difficult to deal with. The few who were present instantly remembered that sloppy face, and a chill was felt. Question mark question mark question mark question mark question mark question mark. However, Mr. Weiss, who was one step ahead, didn't hear those words. After patting the dust on his clothes, Weiss stepped on the land of Nita's star. This backward planet, Weiss sighed, because not far away, a group of native stars were twisting their savage bodies around the bonfire, savage and boring. Really hopeless. With no effort, he found the leader of Nita's star, Seely. He was sleeping soundly on a piece of skin that he didn't know what it was, and there was a suspicious transparent flow from the corners of his thick mouth. This is a disgusting guy. Weiss was a little unbearable. He elegantly smashed the little native who was leading the way on him, and as expected, he heard a scream. Weiss clapped his hands and watched the leader turn over and grab his self-defense club in his hand. Sleep well. You are the leader of this planet. Weiss greeted well-bred. Seely didn't understand the situation in front of him at all. He only remembered where the boy with the blue strange circle seemed to have seen it, but he couldn't think of it for a while. But what? Seely rolled his eyes, weighed the mallet in his hand, and tentatively opened his mouth. Then who is your excellency? You must have received the notice of the visit. I was sent by the god of destruction. Weiss said lightly. Seely froze in place, wanting to hammer people. Seely thought about the odds of winning such a sneak attack. But what he was afraid of was the Lord Destruction King. Therefore, he suppressed the anger in his heart, and pretended to be stupid with a blank face. What notice? I've slept here for so long, and it's not that I haven't seen all kinds of aliens, but as for your excellency, is it too rude? Action. It's not cute, Weiss thought. At the same time, patiently remind. The god of destruction has issued an order a few days ago to let the king of the realm build a new planet. Naturally, it is no different from this Nita planet. As for you, of course you have to move to a new planet to live in. When Weiss said this, there was a flash of light in his always indifferent eyes. It's an honor for you to see Nita Star, the god of destruction. But Seely laughed, waving a pair of rough palms, and the corners of his mouth were wide, very funny. I don't want to know who the god of destruction is. The real king is probably coaxed by you. Since you keep saying that the god of destruction likes it here. Why don't he come and tell us in person? Weiss is arrogant, and he doesn't want to be a strong man. He is also arrogant when he was ordered by the god of destruction to negotiate with them this time. So when he heard Seely say this, he thought about it for 2 seconds. Master God of Destruction is in a state of affairs. I'm afraid you won't be able to see it. However, Weiss said silently in his heart, I am afraid that such a boring thing, the God of Destruction, will not come. Fierce look on his face. Then, the adults have to rest here first, and wait for the God of Destruction to pick you up in person. As soon as he finished speaking, he only waved at Seely before him, and in an instant, dozens of needed people rushed out, all of them holding sharp weapons and looking fierce. Take this lord and treat me well, Seely said viciously. And the besieged Weiss did not expect that a small cave could accommodate so many indigenous people. I sighed secretly in my heart, but there was a look of disdain on my face. Just you, a mob. Seely Jia smiled strangely. Then try it. My lord. Following an order, the group of natives rushed forward as if they were dying. You really pissed me off. Weiss turned sideways to avoid the attack. I kindly persuade you, you are on the road to death, so be prepared to accept the wrath of God. Weiss has never liked to do it, but these stupid guys really touched his bottom line, and they dared to speak rudely to the god of destruction. Then there is no need to exist. Chapter 271, True Love. Chapter 271, True Love. At this time, the god of destruction, who was waiting outside, fell into memory in boredom. When can you change your character? The deity will feel that everything is fine, The god of destruction looked at this guy in front of him, and the disgust in his eyes was full of disgust. This guy can be said to make it difficult for him to evaluate. As his assistant, he should have been domineering like him, and then he was respected by everyone, but what he didn't expect was that the guy in front of him turned out to be so gay. It's a shame to think about it. His dignified god of destruction makes everyone fearful. His words and deeds are related to the survival of the entire planet. It is also very embarrassing to have such a subordinate. However, he never stayed away from Weiss, because some things were more important than this, and he never pursued them. If it was someone else who looked like a ghost, don't even think about staying by his side. It's so embarrassing, and wanting to go out is just a dream. Master God of Destruction, how can you despise me like this? No matter how I live, I have always been loyal to you. You have seen this for all to see, so please don't talk about me anymore, okay? Weiss was a little timid, but there was still something in his behavior that made people feel mother, but the god of destruction didn't get angry with him. Instead, he smiled mysteriously. Since you don't want to change, then we'll wait and see. This remark made my heart tremble a little, and I was very worried about what would happen in the next second. Weiss's heart suddenly became a little flustered. The big guy in front of him can be said to have put 100,000 volts of pressure on him. He dared to swear to everything that he was absolutely loyal to the person in front of him. And he is willing to go through fire and water for his so-called adventure, not only because of its majesty and power, but also because of an inexplicable intimacy in his heart. Although to be honest, the god of destruction has never had any tender moments to speak to people. Of course it's impossible for him, but the god of destruction is also good to him. He will distribute all the benefits to him, which makes him really moved. A person who can dominate all things can think of such a thing for him. A little bit, that's some of his honors. Why don't you talk anymore? I feel like you're very flirtatious. The god of destruction has a feeling of questioning. Although he can bear the girl in front of him, he is only used to it. If he insists on acting like a spoiled child, then you must bypass him, otherwise he will not endure it. He has his own principles in life and conduct, and he will not change it easily because of this matter. As the god of destruction that makes everyone tremble, he feels that everything must be in his own hands. No one can disobey his orders, no one can acting recklessly in front of his eyes, and the favor he gave must make that person grateful. He's just so arrogant. So what? He doesn't think he should change these things, because there's no need for that at all. And the reason why he endured this bitch in front of him is because Whis' friendship with him is absolutely true. When he faced the Quanwang, Whis was always standing behind him. Thinking of this, God of Destruction suddenly fell into contemplation, and his gloomy face made Whis feel a little terrifying. Lord God of Destruction, what happened today? Why did he suddenly fall into a kind of contemplation? It made me a little scared. There were many crows floating in Whis' heart, and he couldn't help but panic. Could it be that he provoked this adult today? God, thinking of this, Whis began to tremble, and his expression suddenly panicked. Who knows how scared he is? The god of destruction in front of him, as long as he provokes him, the consequences will be very serious. I clearly remember that there was someone pretending to be coercive last time, but the god of destruction moved his finger, and that person was instantly blurred. And he knew very well in his heart that it wasn't power that didn't reach that level, but that he wanted the person to scream after being bloody, and then express his repentance in this way. Although it is impossible for that person to have any remorse in his heart, he must not dare to say it because of the powerful strength in front of him, and he has to beg for mercy to the people who hurt him like that. Painful things. So from that person, from many people, he first learned a lot of lessons. People who have no ability must not pretend to be a force. But Whis didn't know what the god of destruction was thinking, and the god of destruction thought of Whis' true feelings for him. The god of destruction was originally waiting for Whis in outer space, but who knew that energy fluctuations occurred on that planet, interrupting the god of destruction's memories, and the three of them rushed directly over. Seeing that Seely was working with Whis, he also knew about Whis' strength. It was impossible for Seely to get close. At this time Whis dodged back and forth like teasing him. The god of destruction was angry and waved his hand directly, and a light cannon knocked Seely to the ground and fell into a deep pit. If he hadn't happened to be there that time, there would be no danger that Whis would have encountered any danger. It was a lot of relief to have such a heartfelt person by his side. Chapter 272, Do you have any opinions? Chapter 272, Do you have any opinions? Yes, the god of destruction returned to that time involuntarily at this moment. Even he himself was a little dazed, and Whis had no idea what the god of destruction was thinking at the moment. But if he knew what the god of destruction was thinking, he would surely breathe a sigh of relief. Lord God of Destruction, this guy in front of me is ignoring your existence at all. Look, otherwise he wouldn't hurt me like this. I'm directly uncomfortable right now. At that time, Whis suddenly pretended to be pitiful to himself, which made him very unhappy. The grieved appearance of Whis is a small feeling in human terms, but he can't care so much. After all, he is his own person, and he can't let others bully him. And looking at him like that is really uncomfortable. The guy who dares to break ground on Tai Sui's head, he wants to see what the hell he looks like. Dog thing, he is quite capable, so let's see what happens to the person who bullied me today. Yes, the god of destruction couldn't help but give him a slap in the face. Of course, he didn't have any right to speak, and this little ant must be punished. Wow. Don't dare to provoke again in the future. The legendary god of destruction is indeed well deserved. ... Because of his palm, Seely fell directly to the ground, and smashed the ground into a big hole, which made the natives stunned, and I was also shocked by his power. And the punishment that Seely received was far from enough. It was a dream to escape from him so easily. What? Any comments? Originally, after giving this guy a slap, the anger in my heart has been reduced by a few points, but what I did not count is that the dog has the ability to show such an expression. Siri fell to the ground, his mind had already collapsed. Although he had already heard about the name of the god of destruction, he had never seen him, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Today he really regretted it. Of course, the expression on his face was because the pain on his body could not be concealed at all, but he had already begun to regret it in his heart. He could only pray silently in his heart. If he was doing anything, he might be shattered by then. He doesn't want to be half dead at a young age, and there are still many things that have not been completed, but he thinks so in his heart. In the heart of the god of destruction, his expression is a kind of provocation. Therefore, poor Seely will be miserable, and he will be completely wrong, and he will be responsible for the consequences that will be caused at that time. So, there is the sentence of God of destruction. When he got to this sentence, of course, he wanted to pass out immediately. Damn, why is he so unlucky? But to be honest, all the pain in his body was caused by that whiz. That guy must not let him take the opportunity, otherwise the pain he suffered today will definitely be repaid tenfold in the future. ... Bang. When he thought like this, he was once again caught by the god of destruction, and before he had time to ask for mercy, what everyone saw. It was the god of destruction who directly buried a small ball of light in the ground, and the four flew into space. The entire Nita star instantly became a mushroom cloud in the universe, and exploded in the entire seventh universe. Yes, this poor fellow has lost his life before he could beg for mercy. Everyone looked terrified, but they didn't dare to say any words. The god of destruction in front of him was really terrifying, so you must not provoke anything in the future. Otherwise, the trouble it brings to oneself will affect many people. Therefore, since everyone started to move quietly, after a while, the dark crowd on the square has long disappeared, because everyone is afraid of death, who wants to lose their life easily. However, the god of destruction, he didn't have any fluctuations in his heart. Instead, he felt that his temper was really too good, so he allowed these guys to break ground on his head. If someone dares to do this again in the future, he can't guarantee how much anger he will make. Today is a relatively small anger, because he thinks that it may have been too brutal before, but he never expected such consequences. That's why he has accumulated all the fire that hasn't been fired for a long time to this day. Thinking like this, she glanced at the square below, and found that the group of humans had long since disappeared, which surprised her a little, but those guys actually knew how powerful he was, so that would be good, lest he was using his strength to make them understand that it will be very troublesome for everyone at that time. After the explosion of the fire disappeared, the entire planet turned into a huge super Dragon Ball. Chapter 273, Elephant Paw Anomaly. Chapter 273, Elephant Paw Anomaly. The god of destruction is in a good mood now, and no one can break his good mood at all. Whis looked at the god of destruction and couldn't help shivering. But he didn't respond at all, still humming his own little song. God of destruction, aren't you crazy? Whis looked at the god of destruction and finally came to a conclusion and asked. The god of destruction glanced at him, resisting the urge to roll his eyes, and gave an unquestionable answer. No. Weiss had no choice but to nod and just say one word, oh. Skinny, why are you so happy? Shampa was more straightforward, and without any hesitation, he asked directly. The god of destruction glanced at Shampa, then glanced at the people who were also full of doubts without any emotion, and chuckled lightly. Hee hee. The god of destruction is fine if he doesn't laugh, but a few people get goosebumps when he laughs. Weiss was even more exaggerated, and he felt a chill in his heart and retched twice. Gruff. The god of destruction glanced at Weiss in dissatisfaction. Okay, god of destruction, just say it, Tilda. Shampa suddenly leaned up and said coquettishly. Vomiting this time, but god of destruction. The god of destruction retched to the ground while pushing away the elephant. Okay, I said it's okay. The god of destruction said. Shangpa was so happy that he jumped up again. Ah, what's the matter? Stay away from me, okay. The god of destruction couldn't hold back for a while, and retched and pushed the elephant away again, saying, Okay tilde. Shangpa was obedient, and turned around and left 5 meters away from the god of destruction. Now that we have successfully collected the first Super Dragon Ball, this is a joy in itself. If we move out directly, we will give them 3 days. 3 days is enough for us to do everything. Done. Before Weiss asked the question, what if we don't move out? God of Destruction seemed to know that they would ask such a question, and answered the question one step ahead. If you don't move out, it's better to just destroy the Dragon Ball. As soon as the words came out, everyone present was stunned. How can you do this? Since it's useless to us, why don't you just return it? Why destroy it? The first person to react was Shangpa. Shangpa didn't know what was going on with him, but a surge of anger rose in his heart. It was estimated that his strong sense of justice did not allow God of Destruction to do this. The God of Destruction laughed instead of being angry. He lowered his head and sneered in a low voice. Suddenly, he raised his head again, with unknown emotions flashing in his eyes. In fact, if you look closely at the eyes of the God of Destruction, although his eyes are not a once in a century, they are still pretty. What's with me? A cold voice broke the silence. In an instant, this silence seemed to have never existed, but the voice of the God of Destruction had been echoing in the ears of several people. What's with me? Yes, what does their business have to do with his God of Destruction? All of a sudden, several people fell into silence. No one knew how to answer, stunned in place. After a long silence, the God of Destruction broke the silence. I am not a goddess of destruction, I was born to destroy all these things. The crowd fell silent again. Well, what are you doing with the atmosphere so embarrassing? Pack up and get ready to go to the next planet. The first to answer was Weiss. Immediately, everyone responded one by one and left. And the God of Destruction, who had no emotion just now, suddenly regained his initial excitement, as if the person who had no emotion just now was not him. Thinking that he is one step closer to resurrecting his father, he is even more excited and excited. But the next Super Dragon Ball is in the 6th universe managed by Shangpa. Weiss suggested that a few people go to the 6th universe first. The God of Destruction hesitated and agreed. I don't know how long it took before everyone found out that Shangpa's face didn't seem to be very good during this time, but when everyone asked him, he just smiled and replied, it's okay. The God of Destruction and Weiss were very vigilant, but when they saw Shangpa's answer, they didn't say much. What's the matter with him? Weiss asked secretly in his heart, but of course no one knew about all this. It's also good that this pervert doesn't bother me anymore. Weiss thought, and couldn't help showing another smile, but then he thought. If he has been like this, I seem to be a little uncomfortable. Immediately, Weiss' face was a little unnatural. He is the only living treasure in the team, and he can adjust the atmosphere if there is something to do. If even this living treasure becomes so quiet, what will our team do at that time? Thinking, Weiss' face showed a sad but worried expression again. But what Weiss didn't know was that there was a person in the dark, silently watching the ever-changing expressions on Weiss' face, silent. Chapter 274, The Mystery Solved. Chapter 274, The Mystery Solved. However, the preoccupied appearance of Shangpa was all seen by Vados, and he was also thinking about it all the way, but he didn't make a sound. After all, this time he was going to do something big, and he couldn't ask questions casually. Yes, it's not good for everyone. God of Destruction, are we here yet? The 4 of them have been traveling in the space for a long time, and suddenly they saw a bright light in front of them. Looking closely, this is very similar to their destination. Since several people have never been here before, no one knows what the so-called sixth universe looks like. Although they have checked the relevant information before coming here, they cannot easily make a conclusion without any definite evidence. Otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. I hope so. The deity has been tired for a long time, and if this rubbish place does not appear, when the deity finds him, it will be destroyed in minutes. The god of destruction showed an expression of invincibility, as if he had already ruled the world. In fact, he is indeed very powerful, but there are thousands of powerful people in this dimension, and he is definitely not the most powerful. This may not be a bit arrogant. If you look closely, the rebellious expression on his cat face can beat countless people. Skin and bones, don't show off anymore. Although you are also amazing, I'm not too bad. Elephant Pa, who was a lap fatter than the god of destruction, finally spoke up. He was worried all the way, but he was still there. The silence stopped when he made fun of the god of destruction. Shampa's eyes are full of contempt. This guy is born arrogant, and he has never been low-key since he came out of his mother's womb. Although he has to admit that his strength is indeed very strong, he looks like the #1 father in the world all day long. He didn't want to talk, so every time he went out, he would tell this guy, "Go out, don't say they know each other." The relationship between the two adults seems to be very good. It is as expected that they are twin brothers, which is quite enviable. Just when the two were arguing, Vados suddenly spoke, but no one noticed her tone. Shy-in. Yes, who would have thought that since this lovely angel likes this cold-blooded and ruthless god of destruction, the god of destruction. And it's the kind of secret crush, but he never dares to say it, which makes people a little unbelievable. If anyone pays attention, Whis' eyes are on the god of destruction at the moment. Don't be ridiculous, Vados, two adults, since we're here, why don't we go in? Weiss suddenly said respectfully, don't delay the big thing, or the god of destruction will be angry. Go. The god of destruction didn't even move, and everyone could only follow in his footsteps. Lord Shampa, Lord Shampa. As soon as the four of them arrived in the sixth universe, someone named Shampa, and everyone was surprised. When the person walked in, they found out that he was a nobody. What's the matter with the deity's younger brother? The god of destruction has always been protecting the calf, and he is also his biological younger brother. Of course, no one is allowed to use any tricks to hurt him. Reporting to the god of destruction, our realm king of the sixth universe wants to see the Lord Shampa, and if he has a business relationship with him, please let the Lord of the god of destruction accommodate. This person is naturally guilty. He has long heard that the name of the god of destruction, the god of destruction. Today, when he sees it, he will pinch people to death. Of course, he does not dare to offend him. However, since he is a close friend of the Kaiwang god, he doesn't need that kind of vivinono, he just needs to make things clear. Really, that's polite. Why do you ants think that this deity's younger brother will go with you easily? The god of destruction's eyes were full of disdain, but Shampa's eyes made him understand. It turned out that this guy had a preoccupied look along the way. Could it be that he had already guessed it? Then why not discuss it with him? They never need to be wronged by others. He also didn't allow his younger brother to be bullied by others casually. The words of this person in front of him made him very angry. If it wasn't for the presence of so many people, he would have already made this person into scum. Damn, what qualifications do you have to say, want to see, these two words? If you want to say it, you should say that you want to invite them. Skinny, don't be ridiculous, I have important things. Shampa said very seriously. The god of destruction is not good to meddle anymore, so he snorted disdainfully, is he meddling with his own business? It's not that Weiss and Vados didn't say it at the moment, it really made the atmosphere very awkward. Afterwards, the four of them went to the Realm King God Star in the sixth universe together. The great Realm King God was waiting for Shampa with his beard and eyes wide open. When Shampa landed first, he accused Shampa of neglecting his duties. Master Shampa is having a good time. It doesn't seem like you need to come back. Your old man's wings are hard outside. What are you doing back to our small place? If you can't come back at all, then you won't come back, okay? The old man scoffed at Shangpa. Chapter 275. Look down on the elephant. Chapter 275. Look down on the elephant. The air became very quiet, and the voice of Zhuang Shenjuing Shangpa was extraordinarily clear, like a very complicated noise, which made people want to destroy this sound source body. Unlike the god of destruction, Shangpa has always had a good temper, and he doesn't feel that a casual scolding can affect him, so he doesn't get angry for no reason, and he never opens his mouth. Why are you like this? You think it's great to be able to scold people casually. Even if it's a realm god, you can't do this, right? Where is your quality? Vados is simply disgusted by the old man in front of him. It's amazing, can he go to heaven if he can touch his beard? Why bully her friend? Furthermore, this is someone who is likely to become her brother-in-law in the future, and she has to protect him no matter what. You little girl, don't talk nonsense if you don't know, otherwise I'll get angry. You must look good, believe it or not. It looks like you can do whatever you want. And he poutedly fiddled with his eyebrows, as if he liked to stroke his beard, and kept pulling his beard. You old guy, be careful about your longevity and die. Don't you know that you are on the same level as Mr. Shangpa? Go out, don't say I know you, I'm still ashamed. Vados looked at it with contempt. The guy in front of him really wanted to tear him to pieces with both hands, but there was nothing he could do. Today, she feels that she has exerted her strength to suckle, and used all the tricks of shrewish scolding, but it still has no effect. It seems that she has encountered a strong enemy today. And she really couldn't be more angry. She had never seen such a shameless guy who leaned on the old and sold the old. In his heart, the old people were all highly respected. Now it seems that his 3 views have been completely destroyed, and he can't help but feel bad, giving himself such a blowing experience. He must make this old guy look good. Tigers can really treat people like sick cats if they don't show their power. Ellipsis. Well, she's actually an angel, but so what? Old man, it's also a waist plate. Why are you so prominent? Are you not afraid of being accidentally slapped by others? Today I will be an angel among the devils, no matter what. Must seek justice. Little girl film. Anyway, it's not your turn to speak, so don't challenge my limit, otherwise if the old man makes trouble, I'm afraid you can't bear it. Of course, the realm king god is also disdainful. In fact, he is forced in his heart. He has been in the 6th universe for so many years, and he has never heard what this girl said about the most prominent waist plate. What does it mean? Of course, he won't show this. As the greatest of him, of course he doesn't allow it. He doesn't know some things. Even if he doesn't know, he has to pretend to know. Otherwise, how can he protect his fame? He has been majestic for so many years, and he has always been respected by others. It was the first time that he saw such a little girl's film, and he even dared to challenge his limit. If it were him when he was young and vigorous, he would have taught this little girl a lesson long ago, so that she would not be able to speak from now on, and see if she would dare to howl here. Today, he was deliberately trying to make Shangpa look ugly, but what he didn't expect was that Shangpa was successfully insulted by him. The little girl's film, but she was very stubborn. Wouldn't she be the little lover hired by that guy? No wonder he is so protective, otherwise, his face will be lost, right? Yo, I really didn't expect that Mr. Shangpa is as useless and weak as he was back then, and he has to rely on a little girl to protect himself from the wind and waves, but he is like a tortoise with a shrunken head. Even if you are afraid of being told by others, don't do it if you have the ability. Vados saw that the old man's eyes became strange, and he suddenly felt that this guy must have no good intentions, and if he said it, people wanted to strangle him to death. I'm afraid you didn't accumulate virtue in your past life. Otherwise, how could you be so cheap? If you are not good at being a human being, let your aunt teach you. What qualifications can you use to say Mr. Shangpa? At this moment, Vados is really angry, so she can't take care of that much anymore. No matter how powerful the old guy in front of her is, Anyway, God of Destruction and Elephant Paw are also very powerful. It's a big deal. The old man who was scolding himself was angry, so he could just hide behind them, but he really couldn't, and there was his brother, so he couldn't control that much. Then your respected Master Shangpa was once wanted by King Benquan. I don't know if your old man still remembers it. I was so embarrassed at that time that I was deeply impressed by the old man, and I would never even dare to forget it. What if you say that my memory is too good? I don't want to have such a good memory. Then you say that you are so good. Are you qualified to let me be on an equal footing with you? Chapter 276, Bitterness. Chapter 276, Bitterness. Presumptuous, old guy, do you want to die? The God of Destruction went straight with a punch. For the first time, he held back his temper and didn't show himself. In fact, he wanted to know how arrogant this old man was to his younger brother, so that he could have a taste of what would happen to him. It was the first time I saw someone treat my brother so excessively, completely disregarding everything for him. The anger in my heart was immediately aroused, thinking that anyone who touches his hair can be crushed to pieces by him. Now I see my brother being abused like this by others. He didn't know how to make this old man get the maximum punishment. Those who dared to provoke him must be mentally prepared. Bang! When the Realm King God was still in a state of arrogance, the God of Destruction's unexpected punch made him a little panicked. Before he realized it, the golden treasure seat he had been making, including himself, had already succeeded in on the ground. The golden throne has long been turned into scum, but fortunately he still has some strength. He just spit out blood, but in fact he also suffered serious injuries. The God of Destruction has done a good job. This is how you should treat this old guy. If I can, I'm thinking of strangling him here twice, and avenging Mr. Shangpa well. This dog can't spit out ivory. The thing that should be treated like this. I have never seen such a shameless old guy. At this time, of course Vados raised his hands and applauded. Although it seems that a beautiful angel is very excited like a female nerve, there is a little sense of inconsistency in the picture. But at this happy moment, it doesn't matter anymore. At the same time, Vados's feelings for the God of Destruction seem to have deepened. Such an excellent person is of course the unparalleled hero she has longed for a long time. He is so powerful that his admiration has suddenly reached its peak, so even more excited. If anyone who understands emotions is here, they can feel the pink bubbles in Weiss' eyes. But in such a tense environment, no one has noticed this. Vados, you are making a fool of yourself. Of course, Weiss quickly stopped him. Seeing his sister was so presumptuous, he immediately began to panic. Although he said that the God of Destruction was good to them, he was furious. Don't mess with it, otherwise the two of them will be killed in the end. The legendary companion is like a companion tiger, but that's it. Of course, he knows the importance of Shangpa to the God of Destruction. Although the two of them usually meet each other, they are real, blood-related twin brothers. Who are they? I don't want to see the other party suffer any harm, let alone such a mighty person as the God of Destruction. How can he see his younger brother with his own eyes? Being so insulted by others. Of course, he knew in his heart that the God of Destruction was going to lose his temper, so he and his sister must not hit the muzzle of the gun. Otherwise the two innocent people of them would become the punching bag of the God of Destruction. Although, let's just say, he has a little weight in the heart of the God of Destruction, but in this, it can't compare to his own brother, and it can't compare to the sincere heart that was not trivial in the past when he was angry, but because of many unavoidable reasons, she is still willing to follow the God of Destruction. However, the wisdom of learning must be learned. And this is also one of the basic principles that should be understood in this relatively complex world. Brother, it's okay, you say yes, God of Destruction. Vados said, sticking out his tongue like the God of Destruction mischievously. Of course Vados didn't know this. She regarded the God of Destruction as an unparalleled hero. Although she would not think of his murderous side, she would not think that her life might be taken away by the God of Destruction one day. Maybe this is because I haven't grown up, but I'm still too young. Seeing his sister so naughty, Whis' mind began to feel bad, and now I hope Lord God of Destruction will not blame him, otherwise the sky will fall and he will not be able to bear it. God of Destruction didn't take this into consideration. He was busy teaching that old man a lesson, but for Wes' sake, and this little girl's movie just stood up for his younger brother, although he didn't take anyone seriously, but the truth still knows how to be grateful, so he gave a lukewarm hum. For those who don't know, this is a casual sound, but in the eyes of Weiss, it is stunned. I have never seen it before. Who is the God of Destruction being so polite to? Quote. A group of people are busy discussing here, and the old man of the world God King is struggling. Who has thought about his mood? He is so sad and can't be sad anymore. Is this what people call a variable? Of course he knew that Shanka was the younger brother of the God of Destruction, but Shanka always liked to swallow all his sufferings, which made him even more arrogant and would always bully Shanka. However, he did not expect the arrival of the God of Destruction. If it was just Shanka, he would still be able to compete, and the God of Destruction was the top existence among the gods of destruction in the entire 12 universes. Chapter 277. What are you afraid of? Chapter 277. What are you afraid of? Why, old man, if you dare to do it, you must do it, otherwise, you have nothing to live for at such a fucking age. The God of Destruction never swears easily, firstly because he disdains swearing, and secondly because it doesn't fit the temperament of his majestic universe, but today he finally met someone and made him make an exception. Yes, this is the first time he is so angry, even he is rare. Is this old guy really tired of living, or does he want to experience the pain early? Lord God of Destruction, you can't do this. The old man was so frightened that his eyes fell to the ground. God of Destruction was cruel. He had heard of it for a long time, but he never paid attention to it before, because he felt that there would never be any intersection. He walked on his single plank bridge, and the God of Destruction crossed his Yangguan Road, but only today did he realize what he was afraid of. The God of Destruction is not someone who can easily compromise with whatever you say. He knew this before. In the past, a relative of his offended the God of Destruction. There are high-ranking positions, but that's nothing, it's all bullshit for God of Destruction. The relative's parents finally came to the door and asked him to seek justice, but of course he couldn't go into the muddy waters, and he was very sensible and closed the door. It's good to go directly to the God of Destruction in the past, even if you offend those relatives, it's still a trivial matter after all. However, today he confronted him directly, and he insulted his younger brother like this. He would definitely not give up easily, and he couldn't tell his own fate, just like those people. I haven't thought about it. He is so beautiful, so many years, and when he is so embarrassed, it is really 30 years Hidong, 30 years Hexi. Life is always in an unknown state, no one knows the next second. Will you climb from the quagmire to the clouds, or fall into the abyss at the highest peak? He experienced this kind of change today, and he was completely overwhelmed by fate, and the burden of life overwhelmed him. Of course, this is what I think in my heart, and I have to do enough on the surface. So, he pretended to be calm and said, "So, what do you want?" His tone was a little trembling. He could stop it. He was trying to be brave, but even if he was brave, he couldn't easily let others trample on his dignity. Although he was extremely afraid of the God of Destruction in his heart, he controlled his trembling hands and tried very hard to make his distorted expression smile, and made it look like he was not afraid of anything. When the time comes, I will find an excuse to file a complaint, saying how arrogant the God of Destruction is, how not to look down on everyone, and then let him suffer some hardships. Although I don't know who the God of Destruction is afraid of, or who he has been afraid of, there is always a way for all things in the world to overcome each other. It doesn't mean that he is invincible. Therefore, he had the confidence to speak like this, but he predicted one thing wrong. Really? The God of Destruction thought the old man in front of him was a little ridiculous. He was naturally angry when he saw his twin brother being treated like this. Although he always called him Big Fat Cat, and he also said that he was skinny, he would never allow others to slander his younger brother like this. Because none of them have any qualifications, those ants. God of destruction, you can't interfere in the affairs of the sixth universe, and now you are dissatisfied with His Royal Highness King Quan. Seeing that the God of destruction is not afraid of the sky and the earth, the Kaiwang God immediately persuaded, and had no choice but to move out of the big boss behind him. Otherwise, if I lose my name, I will definitely be ridiculed to death. In the face of life and death, everything else is a thread. As long as I can survive, everything will have new hope. He also cares. There is not much more, and the green hills are left, and I am not afraid of running out of firewood. If I can survive today, I will definitely give back the humiliation of today tenfold. The God of destruction sneered a few times. This dog thing, I'm afraid it's going crazy trying to survive, right? Is there not much to do with the King Quan Wang arrogantly? Then may I ask this old guy in front of you, what have you seen this deity afraid of? Is there still less presumptuousness of this deity? Ever since he was born and came into this world, he has not known what true presumptuousness is, nor what fear is. It is just a foil for living in this world. Only a strong man like him is worthy to stand on the top of the world, and let those ants look up to him, and those so-called rulers always face it with their own hypocrisy. Others, the so-called above him, he has never disdained, and never put them in his eyes. Hearing the God of destruction's words, an old man's heart was immediately chilled. The God of destruction made a heavy move to defeat the great Kaiwang God, left Kaiwang, and came to a deserted planet. After destroying it, he got the second Super Dragon Ball. Chapter 278. Motivated, Elephant Paw. Chapter 278. Motivated, Elephant Paw. Shangpa lowered his head, looked at the stone in front of him, kicked with his foot depressed, then squatted down and looked up at the sky. Seeing that the gray sky no longer had the usual blue sky, Shangpa felt even more depressed. He hugged his body, but his hands couldn't reach it at all. This made Shangpa even more sad, and he couldn't help but sighed. He looked at the sky with tears in his eyes, and suddenly, as if he had decided something, he pulled out a smile that was uglier than crying. Vados looked at this sullen elephant, and couldn't bear to go up and pat Shangpa on the shoulder, and then said, "What's the matter with you?" Even though he said so, Vados knew very well that Shangpa must have just lost face in front of the God of destruction and was a little unhappy. She thought that Shangpa would be full of blood and recover after being depressed for a while, but she didn't expect Shangpa to go beyond her expectations this time. "It's okay, Vados, leave me alone, okay? I need time to make sure my decision is right." When the words fell, Shangpa watched Vados turn his head, facing her with the back of his head, and then maintained his movements, leaving Vados alone, twitching the corners of his eyes. After several days, Shangpa still looked unhappy. No matter how much Vados comforted him, it didn't work. He still hugged his chubby body and looked up at the sky. Alas, when will these days end? It's promised to be full of blood and then die. Vados glanced at the side that exuded my unhappiness. I was so depressed, and sighed leisurely. Breathed. The image of the God of destruction flashed involuntarily in her mind, and Vados couldn't help but evoke a smile, and her face slowly burned. She just wanted to cover her face, but suddenly remembered something. Hey, tomorrow seems to be the day when the God of destruction will set off to find the third Super Dragon Ball. Wait until I calculate this time, right? After speaking to himself, Vados lowered his head, tugged at his fingers, and counted it seriously. After a while, Vados finally raised his head and just wanted to open a smile, but he didn't expect. Who had been exuding low air pressure, teleported directly in front of her, and said to him leisurely, "Vados, is it the time for the God of destruction to set off tomorrow to find the third Super Dragon Ball?" Vados was so frightened that she didn't come back to her senses immediately. She looked at the elephant in front of her who had not changed her posture and said, "What's wrong? Do you think you are not depressed anymore?" Shangpa frowned and asked again, "Is it the day to go to the skin and find the third Super Dragon Ball tomorrow?" Shangpa, who looked at Vados nodding, seemed to have suddenly made a decision and said to Vados, "I'm going to practice." Vados's eyes twitched, looking at the elephant in front of him, listening to his resolute tone, he knew that he was not joking. Even so, Vados still took out his hand and touched the other heads and said, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you very lazy? Why do you want to practice suddenly? You don't seem to be sick, don't scare me." Vados looked at the elephant in front of her, and she was suspicious for a while. She didn't know what happened to the elephant, but the behavior of the elephant completely surprised her, didn't she? In other words, is this the Shangpa I know, so motivated? I used to eat or sleep every day, and destroy the planet. Now you say you want to practice. My God, what's the matter, such a joke. Don't make trouble, this must be a spur of the moment, and cultivation is not a joke. Vados said it after thinking about it, but was dismissed by Shangpa. I'm not joking this time, huh? I just want to practice, and I will be surprised when that skinny guy comes back. Although Vados was surprised for a while, Vados still let Shangpa go. And after Shangpa left, she could only follow west to the 7th planet alone. It's very boring when you think about it. Vados sat in the same place, thinking of the god of destruction. She looked at the desolation on the ground, and just thought that the god of destruction told him that she was going to follow him and find the 3rd Super Dragon Ball. But the face of Shangpa flashed in front of him again, and Vados hesitated. She remembered that Shangpa just watched the god of destruction leave every time he left. Vados thought for a while, knowing that his method was not feasible, he shook his head directly, and threw the idea of following the god of destruction to find the 3rd Super Dragon Ball out of his mind. Looking at the god of destruction here, he was thinking about the slightly beaten face of Shangpa all the way, thinking that Shangpa should not be so fragile, but he unconsciously felt that he had done something wrong. After a while, the god of destruction arrived at his own star of destruction god. As soon as he recovered from his thoughts, he saw Ruini who was squatting at the door. Chapter 280 Persuasion. Chapter 280 Persuasion. After a while, Weiss looked at the two women who were still arguing in front of him, but their anger had clearly reached a critical point, and weakly said to the god of destruction beside him, "I feel a little embarrassed." The god of destruction also smiled awkwardly on the side, and he forcibly turned his eyes away from Weiss. Looking at the current situation, I was about to go up to persuade me to fight. Fight, between Layla and Ruini, which was embarrassing anyway. Thinking of this, the god of destruction went straight up, wanting to pull any of the two women away, and then reason with them. He believes that both of them are reasonable people, so the quarrel will not be over by then. But it turns out that fantasy is always beautiful, and reality is always cruel. The god of destruction had just walked into the side of the two women, and before he even started to pull away one of the two women, he was shocked by their aura. The god of destruction couldn't help but stopped and walked to the side. Weiss, who was watching him, didn't dare to disturb him, so he was anxious to watch the two women's increasingly terrifying aura. The god of destruction stood not far away, watching Layla and Ruini touch their chins, carefully observing Layla's words and deeds and Ruini's behavior. The more he looked at the god of destruction, the more he felt that something was wrong. He touched his brows that had been frowning for some reason, sat on the ground without disdain at all, and thought carefully. Layla has already become a god, and now she should have slapped a person who is not very strong like Shang Ruini. What's wrong? What was stopping Layla from doing it? The more I thought about the god of destruction, the more I watched the quarrel between the two of them, trying to get some interesting pictures out of it or to find the reason why the two didn't do it. At this glance, the god of destruction really saw something, and he watched the whip that had been surrounding Ruini shimmering. After a little thought, I realized that this whip is not ordinary. Maybe Layla also found the strangeness of the whip and did not dare to use it easily. After the god of destruction knew the reason why neither of them would do it, he originally thought that the two of them would definitely not do it again, it was just a matter of lip service. When he just came to Weiss and patted Weiss on the shoulder and told him that these two won't do it, don't worry, something happened. I saw Weiss suddenly widened his eyes, his fingers trembled in the direction of the two women, and his mouth kept shaking, as if something very shocking made him speechless. The god of destruction looked at it suspiciously, and his pupils also widened for a moment. It turned out that the two women were fighting with their bare hands out of thin air. The original action of scratching the hair, pinching people and scratching the face is vividly reflected in the two of them. After Weiss calmed down, Ben was very anxious when the two women were scolding each other, and he was about to get angry at this moment. He said to the god of destruction, who was looking at this scene in a daze, "Don't stay there. Quickly think of a way to separate the two." After speaking, looking at the god of destruction, he scratched his hair, and finally a flash of light flashed in his head, and shouted to the god of destruction, "God back. God of destruction, if two women are accidentally caught by each other in the end. I spent my face to see what to do with you. Women value their face very much. If they are caught, they will definitely start a fight, and the scene will be even more difficult to clean up." The god of destruction finally came to his senses and looked at Wes' anxious expression and looked at him strangely. Weiss sighed, looking at the god of destruction's expression. He knew that the god of destruction would definitely be able to solve it. Thinking of this, the burden in my heart has also dropped a lot. Weiss put his arm on the shoulder of the god of destruction and joked to the god of destruction, "You are so blessed to have such beauties fighting for you, too. Oh, I don't know when I will get it. Such beauties come to enjoy. But you are also grown up. Look, these two women seem to be saying that. Oh yes, love rivals are particularly jealous when they meet, haha." God of destruction listened to Weiss' words, finally got two women from a vixen. The style of the painting suddenly changed into that of a barbarian and relieved. He looked at Weiss, arm resting on his shoulder, gave him a cool look, and took his hand lightly. Then the face was twitching and speechless with a little bit of fear, watching the two women escalate from a scolding battle to a fight. It doesn't matter if you look at it, it really ruins your three views when you look at it. The god of destruction twitched the corners of his mouth as he looked at the strange way of fighting in front of him. Although it was a bit strange, but that aura and that ferocity made this fight a little more for no reason. Weird and terrifying. After watching for a while, the god of destruction shook his head and silently warned himself in his heart, "Don't offend women when you offend anyone, or be careful that they can fight like this with you." Asterisk.